Hi there, my name is Steve Gerhardt, and as always, this is the Unagi Observer. Thank you so much for stopping by and watching the video. We are going to do a review of an older Japanese hardcore punk album from a band that some of you might even know, for you fellow punk hardcore fans like me, and that is the Stalin, and we're going to take a look at their album Stop Jap. And this is I believe, the initial lineup for the Stalin on the Political label. So there you go. All right, let us get into it. So before we go into the review of Stop Jap by the Stalin, let me just kind of give you an idea what kind of punk they are. As we all know, in musical genres, you have like the big general name, in this case punk, and then of course there's subgenres within the overarching genre. So some of the subgenres you can find in punk would be kind of like just the general punk that you would see from the Clash and bands like the Damned, initially when the Damned first came out, where it was kind of some type of messaging, usually some type of social messaging in very constructed musical ways. It wasn't heavy metal, but it was harder than pop, and usually said not nice things about the government or society in general. Punk is a sort of rebellion against the status quo, particularly during a time when, in the late 70s and 80s, where there was a lot of haves and have-nots, and things were not fair, and there was a lot of greed going on. So punk is like against, going up against that. So punk was never a genre that you really heard on the top 100, and Casey Kasem didn't really talk about him that much. So that's just punk in general. But like there's some subgenres like horror punk, that would be the Misfits. The Damned later on would go from regular punk into horror punk. So you have that. You have rockabilly. That's where you have the upright bass and just kind of like 50s kind of harsh tones, that kind of a thing. And then you have what is probably the largest subgenre outside of the regular punk, is hardcore punk, and that's where the Stalin falls into. When a lot of people think about punk, they kind of default to the hardcore subgenre, which can be very, very chaotic, just thrashing on the guitar and screaming into a mic. Back in the day when I was in Fart Couch, yes, that was my punk band. That's pretty much what happened. We wailed on guitars and I screamed into a microphone. That's all I'm going to say about that part of my life. It was a fun part, but that's about all there is to it. No record deals, let's just put it that way. So that's what a lot of people default to. So you have some famous bands like Black Flag, Minor Threat, Butthole Surfers, those kinds of guys. And hardcore punk often was divided up into where you were in the world. So the LA punk scene was a lot different than the DC punk scene, which I kind of dabbled in a little bit. And there are some bands that crossed over between locations, like Black Flag did. Henry Rollins, if you know who he is. And so in Japan, obviously punk existed, and it was mainly hardcore punk. You had bands like Gizm, that's the correct way to say it, The Nurse, where they were kind of borderline hardcore. Oh, Gizm was hardcore, but the Nurse was kind of hard, on the verge of being hardcore, and it was a way for them to talk about society in Japan and how, like, some of the things they just didn't like what was going on. And what was one of the big issues in Japan, particularly for punks, is the rampant capitalism that they thought was destroying Japan and taking away people's humanity. They literally believe that. You'll find in Japanese punk, not all, but a significant portion, a significant minority, I should say, were actual socialists. So they actually believed in these kinds of things. The Stalin were kind of in that area, gray area. Certain members, the Stalin had a lot of different band changes over the years, and before the lead singer Endo died of pancreatic cancer. So a lot of the people that kind of came in and out of the band were socialist activists as well. So some of their lyrics, tell you that. So now this album, Stop the Jap, is kind of interesting because some of the songs on here are actually from their first album. They just tweaked some of the lyrics a little bit and renamed the songs. So if you listen carefully, if you're a fan of the Stalin, you already know that. But it's kind of interesting. There is a little bit of socialism influence in here that they kind of talk about it, allude to it a little bit, like Money in the song Money. But you can definitely tell that this is hardcore punk. Now, the interesting thing about the Stalin is that their music is amazingly structured for hardcore. This isn't just thrashing and screaming into a mic. There is melodies. Some of the songs really do only last a couple minutes. Keep in mind that back in the day, in the early 80s, when you were a hardcore punk band in America, particularly in America, your albums would last no more than 8 or 9 minutes. So each song was between 50 seconds and a minute 30. Literally, that's all it was. The Stalin actually actually made songs that, some of them were a couple minutes long, but they actually made 3-minute songs, 4-minute songs, and which is kind of unusual for hardcore bands at that time. So the Stalin came around in 1980. The first incarnation, which is more or less these guys that you see pictured here. That's what they were doing. They were creating these highly structured songs. So, it was almost on the border of not being hardcore, but just regular punk like The Clash, because they were singing about things, they were talking about things, talking about how, it's tough being a salaryman and why bother, and, don't you want to do something for society, that kind of stuff. What's kind of interesting also on this, and one of the reasons why I like this album particularly, is that the Stalin, just like so many hardcore, or just like music in general, people take influences from other places, other things, other genres and stuff like that to create their own sound, and that's exactly what the Stalin did. Song 6 on the first side of this, I for a second thought it was Joey from the Dead Kennedys, Jello, singing in Japanese. It sounded like his voice, and I was just like, wow, okay. So Endo was actually mimicking Jello's voice on that song. There's another song it's actually the last song on the first side, where I was just like, is that Johnny Lydon singing in Japanese? And is that, what's his name from the Sex Pistols, also singing? Johnny Lydon is the lead singer of both Public Limited and the Sex Pistols. So it was kind of weird, just kind of like hearing those influences, but it kind of worked. And again, this is one of those things where you kind of have to be into punk, you have to be kind of into hardcore. Obviously, I'm not going to be in a mosh pit anytime soon, but this, when I was listening to it as I was puttering around my apartment cleaning things up, listening to it, I'm like, feeling the old, just whatever, throw things around. But so whenever I feel that way about it, when I'm listening to a punk album, or hardcore, particularly a hardcore album, then I know that that I'm listening to something pretty good, because it's touching onto those notes of being angry about something that's unfair, and rising up against it, so to speak. So should you listen to Stop Jap by the Stalin? Yes, you absolutely should. Now, if you are definitely into hardcore punk, if you're into Japanese punk, if you're into punk in general, this album should be in your queue. It should be on your Spotify. It should be whatever it is that you listen to on with music. That should be part of it. It is a good. It's just a good album. Well made. And that's the other part of it, is that it's actually quite well produced. So Political, the label, did a really good job in producing this album. Yeah, check it out. Again, I got this on vinyl. I'm sure you can find CDs out there for this, or again, you can probably find it on Spotify or something. So yeah, give it a listen. Get angry. Do something. All right, that is it for this week. Yes, Stop Jap the Stalin by the Stalin. Please check it out whenever you can. If you are a punk and you have not tasted the delicious taste of Japanese hardcore punk, avail yourself. It is wonderful stuff. It is really, really amazing. Pick it up, listen to it. You'll enjoy it. Make sure that if you don't know Japanese, that you figure out the lyrics, because they can be quite interesting. So yes, please listen to Stop Jap by the Stalin. Okay, so that's gonna be it for this week. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be healthy, be good, avoid noises like that, if you can hear that, and love you guys, and as always, watch more anime.